They say true love strikes when you least expect it. For James Miller, it struck during his lunch break at Miller's Auto Repair, along with a speeding Mercedes that nearly ended both their stories. Without hesitation, he pushed the elegant stranger out of harm's way, taking the hit himself. Bruised but alive, he simply dusted off his coveralls and returned to work, never asking her name. Little did he know she was Catherine Wells, heiress to a billion-dollar empire, who had spent her entire life being seen only for her wealth. Until today, when a grease-stained mechanic saw just her life worth saving at any cost, could the simple act of saving a stranger's life lead to the greatest love story never written? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Miller's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. James Miller wiped his brow with a red bandana that had seen better days, leaving a fresh streak of oil across his forehead. At 35, his hands told the story of a life spent bringing engines back from the dead. Calloused palms, scarred knuckles, and fingernails that never quite came clean. He glanced at the faded photograph hanging above his workbench, himself at age 10, standing proudly beside his father at the garage's grand opening. Robert Miller's smile beamed through his salt and pepper beard, one arm around his son's shoulders, the other holding up the keys to their dream. 25 years later, that dream was held together by determination and duct tape. "Morning, Mr. Miller," called Sandy Thompson, shuffling into the garage. The retired schoolteacher had been bringing her '85 Volvo in for maintenance since James was in high school. "How's your father doing?" James smiled, though his eyes carried a weight beyond his years. "He's fighting, Mrs. Thompson. You know, Dad. Too stubborn to let a little thing like cancer slow him down." He patted the Volvo's hood affectionately. "How's Eleanor treating you?" "Oh, she's purring like a kitten, thanks to you. Though she's making that funny noise again when I turn left." James nodded, already reaching for his tools. "Let's take a look. Coffee's fresh if you want some." "Just made it." The morning unfolded like countless others before it. James moved between vehicles with the grace of a dancer who knew every step by heart. A timing belt here, a transmission flush there, pausing occasionally to explain repairs to customers in terms they could understand. He never rushed. Never cut corners, even though the stack of bills in his office drawer suggested maybe he should. During a brief lunch break, he unwrapped the sandwich he'd made that morning. Turkey on wheat, no mayo, just like his mother used to make. The financial papers spread across his desk told a familiar story. Rising costs, declining margins, and a neighborhood slowly being gentrified out of his price range. 3 repair shops had closed within 10 blocks this year alone. Modern cars, with their computerized systems, needed specialized equipment that cost more than his annual revenue. The bank had made it clear, adapt or die, but adaptation meant debt, and debt meant risk, and risk meant possibly losing everything his father had built. His phone buzzed, a text from the hospice nurse. "Your father's having a good day?" Asked. "About the garage." James typed back a quick reply, promising to visit after work. He'd tell his father about Mrs. Thompson's Volvo, about young Tommy's first oil change on his starter car, about the small victories that made up their lives. He wouldn't mention the bills, the worry, the sleepless nights spent wondering how long they could keep the lights on. The afternoon brought in Marco's food truck, which had been serving the best tamales in the neighborhood for longer than James could remember. Marco's son helped him down from the driver's seat. Arthritis, making the step more challenging each year. "On the house today, James." Marco insisted, pressing a warm package into his hands. "You fixed Maria's car last month when we were short. Family takes care of family." James tried to protest, but Marco's stern look silenced him. In their neighborhood, pride came second to community. It was an unspoken agreement. They all looked out for each other, because who else would? As the day wound down, James stood in the doorway of his office, surveying his kingdom of concrete and steel. The tools on the wall gleamed in the setting. "Son," each one a reminder of countless problems solved, machines restored, lives made a little easier. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "A mechanic doesn't just fix cars, son. He fixes trust. Every vehicle that leaves this garage carries our name, our honor." The honor was intact, but the future remained uncertain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new repairs, new decisions. But for now, James Miller did what he'd always done. He cleaned his tools, swept the floor, and prepared for another day of honest work in a world that seemed to value honesty less and less. He locked up, patting the garage door twice, a habit inherited from his father. The street was quiet now, most shops closed, the evening settling in like an old friend. James didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would change everything. For now, he was simply a mechanic walking home, carrying the weight of his father's legacy in every step. Catherine Wells stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a glittering chessboard. At 32, she was the youngest senior executive vice president in Wells Industries history, a title that meant everything to the world and nothing to her heart. Her reflection stared back. Impeccable silk blouse, tailored charcoal suit, pearls that had once belonged to her grandmother. The perfect corporate princess, groomed since birth to inherit an empire. She absently touched the golden business card. In her pocket, a Wells Industries tradition reserved for the highest echelon of power. The raised lettering felt cold against her fingertips. "Miss Wells," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board is waiting in conference room A." Catherine squared her shoulders, a gesture practiced since childhood. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Claire." The boardroom fell silent as she entered, 12 pairs of eyes following her movement. These men had known her since she was a little girl running through these halls in patent leather shoes. Now they watched her like hawks, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint that Elizabeth Wells's daughter wasn't ready for the responsibility ahead. "Gentlemen," she nodded, taking her seat. "Shall we begin?" The meeting proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. Quarterly projections, market analyses, strategic initiatives, all presented with precision, all receiving her thoughtful consideration. Catherine's questions were sharp, incisive, showing the results of her Harvard MBA and lifelong grooming. But beneath the corporate facade, her mind wandered to the garage hidden in her building's basement. There, under dust covers, sat her secret passion, a 1965 Mustang Fastback, partially restored. The only place she felt truly herself was beneath its hood, hands dirty, working on the engine her mother would have disapproved of her even touching. "Catherine!" Richard Morton, her father's oldest friend and advisor, caught her arm after the meeting. "Have dinner with an old man tonight. We need to talk about your father." 2 hours later, they sat in a private room at Le Cirque, the city, lights twinkling beyond leaded glass windows. Richard swirled his wine, choosing his words carefully. "The doctors say 3 months, maybe 4. William wants to announce the succession plan next week." Catherine's hand tightened around her water glass. "So soon? The market needs stability, Catherine. Your father's illness, rumors are already circulating. The vultures are circling." She thought of her father, once larger than life, now confined to a hospital bed. William Wells had built an empire from nothing, turned a small manufacturing company into a global conglomerate. He'd given her everything, except the freedom to choose her own path. "There's also the matter of Charles Princeton," Richard continued. "The merger would secure Wells Industries' future, and Charles has made his interest in you quite clear." Catherine suppressed a shudder. Charles Princeton, CEO of Princeton Global, had indeed made his intentions clear. At every charity gala, every corporate function, every carefully orchestrated accidental meeting, he saw her the way everyone did, as an acquisition, a merger of dynasties. "I won't be leveraged into a marriage, Richard, not even for Wells Industries." The drive home was a blur of neon and shadows. Her chauffeur, Marcus, knew better than to attempt conversation. In the privacy of her car, Catherine allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, pressing her forehead against the cool window. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more expectations, more pressure to be the perfect heiress. The weight of the Wells name pressed down on her shoulders like a golden crown lined with thorns. In her garage sanctuary, Catherine changed into old jeans and a worn MIT t-shirt, her real clothes. The Mustang waited patiently, a project started in secret after her mother's passing. Elizabeth Wells would have been horrified to see her daughter now, sliding under a classic car, finding peace in the precise mathematics of engine timing and the honest smell of motor oil. Here, alone with her tools and her thoughts, Catherine. Wells wasn't an heiress or a corporate princess. She was just a woman who loved the simple poetry of a well-tuned engine, who dreamed of a life where she could be seen for who she was, not what she was worth. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would bring that dream crashing into reality in the most unexpected way. For now, she was simply a woman in her sanctuary, finding solace in the one place where her heart could beat in time with a V8 engine. Free from the golden cage of expectations. Time has a peculiar way of stretching in moments of crisis. For James Miller, his lunch break began like any other, a turkey sandwich in one hand, work orders in the other, sitting on the garage's front step in the weak spring sunshine. He'd just taken his first bite when he heard the sound that would change everything, the distinctive whine of an engine being pushed far beyond its limits. The Mercedes came screaming around the corner, its driver slumped over the wheel. Later, police would discover he'd suffered a stroke, his foot wedged against the accelerator. But in that moment, all James saw was the vehicle's trajectory and the woman in its path. She stood at the crosswalk, checking her phone, elegant in a cream-colored business suit. The sun caught her dark hair, highlighting auburn undertones. In the split second before action, James noticed the smallest details, her sensible heels, the coffee cup in her left hand, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. The sandwich hit the ground. James was moving before his brain fully processed the danger. Years of mechanical knowledge, calculating trajectories and speeds without conscious thought. The Mercedes engine screamed. The woman looked up, time crystallized into perfect clarity. "Hey!" His shout carried more urgency than volume. She turned, confused, coffee cup still raised halfway to her lips. Too slow, far too slow. James hit her at an angle, his body turning to absorb the impact as they fell. His right arm cradled her head, his left took the brunt of the landing. They hit the pavement hard, rolling once, twice, as the Mercedes roared past close enough to flutter their clothes with its passage. The screech of brakes, the crunch of metal on metal, the gasps of onlookers, all of it registered dimly in James's awareness. His focus remained on the woman beneath him, his body still instinctively shielding her from harm. "Are you okay?" he asked, carefully pushing himself up. His left arm screamed in protest, and he could feel blood trickling from where the pavement had scraped his forearm. Catherine Wells stared up at him, her brown eyes wide with shock. Her perfect suit was smudged with grease from his coveralls, her carefully styled hair splayed across the concrete. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she found herself completely speechless. Yes, I think so," she managed finally. James nodded, satisfied, and rolled to his feet with a grunt of pain. He offered her his good arm, helping her up with careful strength. The Mercedes had come to rest against a telephone pole 50 feet away. Already people were running to help its driver. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "You're hurt," Catherine said, noticing the blood on his arm, the way he held his shoulder. James glanced at his injuries, as if noticing them for the first time. "Nothing serious." "Excuse me, I should check on the driver." He turned away, leaving Catherine standing there, still processing what had happened. She watched as he quickly assessed the Mercedes driver, speaking calmly to the gathered crowd, directing traffic away from the scene with natural authority. The ambulance arrived, then the police. James gave his statement efficiently, downplaying his role, emphasizing his concern for both the driver and the lady in the crosswalk. But when the paramedics tried to examine his arm, he politely declined. "Just scrapes," he insisted. "I need to get back to work. Got a transmission waiting." Catherine stood to the side, giving her own statement to the police, watching as James Miller limped back to his garage. He didn't ask her name, didn't seek recognition or thanks, simply nodded once in her direction and disappeared into the building marked Miller's Auto Repair. The security camera footage would later show exactly how close it had been. Half a second slower, and the Mercedes would have hit Catherine directly. James's split-second decision, his perfect timing, had saved her life. But he treated it as casually as changing a tire or checking oil levels. As her driver helped her into the back of her town car, Catherine found herself touching the grease stains on her ruined jacket. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, really seen her, not as Catherine Wells, heiress to billions, but simply as a human being worth saving. She looked back at the garage as her car pulled away. Through the open bay doors, she could see James already back at work, his injured arm held carefully against his side as he leaned over an engine. Something stirred in her chest, an unfamiliar feeling that had nothing to do with near-death experiences and everything to do with the simple nobility of a man who'd risk his life for a stranger, then go right back to work as if it were nothing. Extraordinary. Catherine Wells had met countless men who wanted to sweep her off her feet, but until today she'd never met one who'd knock her down to save her life and expect nothing in return. Night had fallen by the time James finally closed up the garage. His left arm throbbed, and the adrenaline crash left him feeling every one of his 35 years. The hospital discharge papers lay crumpled in his pocket. He'd finally given in to Mrs. Thompson's motherly insistence that he get checked out, but only after finishing the day's work. "Minor contusions and abrasions," the doctor had said. "Shoulder strain. You should take a few days off." James had nodded politely, knowing he'd be back at work tomorrow. The garage wouldn't run itself, and bills didn't pay themselves either. Still, as he walked home through the quiet streets, his mind kept returning to those few seconds on the crosswalk. The woman's startled eyes, the warmth of her body as he shielded her, the way she'd looked at him afterward with something more than just shock or gratitude. In his small apartment above the local diner, James eased himself onto his worn couch, letting out a long breath. The television murmured in the background, local news covering the day's events. He wasn't paying attention until a familiar scene caught his eye. Near-tragic incident was avoided thanks to the quick action of a local mechanic. Catherine Wells, Senior Executive Vice President of Wells Industries, was nearly struck by an out-of-control vehicle before. James sat up straighter, wincing at the movement. The woman on the screen was the same one he'd saved, but transformed. Perfect makeup, poised demeanor, speaking to reporters with practiced grace. Catherine Wells. The name meant nothing to him, but the reporter's tone told him it should. He switched off the TV, not wanting to hear more. It didn't matter who she was. He'd have done the same for anyone. His father had taught him that every life had equal worth, whether they arrived in a Rolls-Royce or a rusty pickup. Across town, in her penthouse apartment, Catherine stood under the hot shower, letting the water soothe her bruised muscles. She'd cancelled her afternoon meetings, ignored calls from the board, even begged off dinner with Charles Princeton. For once, the mighty Wells Industries machine could run without her. Her ruined suit lay across a chair, designer labels stained with grease and concrete dust. She'd instructed her housekeeper not to have it cleaned yet. The stains felt important somehow, real in a way her carefully curated life often wasn't. Sleep proved elusive. Catherine found herself in her private garage again, the Mustang's engine compartment open like a book. But tonight she wasn't working. Instead, she sat in the driver's seat, running her fingers over the steering wheel, thinking about split-second decisions and the kind of man who'd risk his life for a stranger. She'd had her assistant pull up everything she could find on James Miller. The garage had been in his family for 2 generations. No criminal record, no bankruptcies despite the tough economy. Just decades of honest work and good reviews from loyal customers. The security camera footage played on her tablet, showing the incident from multiple angles. She'd watched it a dozen times now, analyzing the moment like one of her business reports. The precision of his movement, the instant decision to protect her head during the fall, the way he'd immediately shifted focus to helping others. It spoke of a character rarely found in her world of corporate sharks and society climbers. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Charles Princeton, expressing concern, offering to send his private physician. Catherine left it unanswered. Instead, she opened her browser, searching for local news coverage of the incident. Most focused on her, the Wells heiress's brush with death, but one small community paper had interviewed James's elderly neighbor. "That's just who James is," the woman had said. "Always putting others first, just like his father. This neighborhood wouldn't be the same without them." The sun was rising when Catherine finally made her decision. She'd been raised to approach every situation with careful strategy, to consider all angles, to never act on impulse. But today had shown her how quickly life could change. How all her careful plans meant nothing against the random chaos of fate. Her fingers traced the smooth metal of her grandmother's ring, a simple band compared to the massive rocks her society friends wore, but the only piece of jewelry that had ever felt real to her. For generations, Wells women had passed it down, saved it for moments of absolute certainty. Catherine Wells had spent her entire life being the person everyone expected her to be. Perhaps it was time to be the person she glimpsed in a mechanic's eyes, someone worth saving, not for her name or her wealth, but simply for being human. She picked up her phone and called her driver. Tomorrow would change everything, but for tonight, She allowed herself to feel the simple gratitude of being alive, of being seen, of standing on the precipice of something entirely new and unexpected. The morning light was different at street level. Catherine had spent so many years looking down from corporate heights that she'd forgotten how the sun played differently here, casting long shadows between buildings, glinting off shopfront windows. Her driver, Marcus, had raised an eyebrow when she'd instructed him to park around the corner rather than directly in front of Miller's auto repair. "I'll wait here, Miss Wells." "No," she said, surprising them both. "Take the morning off, Marcus. I'll call when I need you." She stood on the sidewalk, watching him drive away. Her hand touched the small velvet box in her coat pocket, her grandmother's ring nestled inside. Anyone else would have called her crazy. One day, one incident, one act of heroism. It wasn't logical, wasn't sensible, wasn't the careful calculation expected of a Wells. But Catherine had spent her entire life being sensible. Perhaps it was time for something real. The garage's bay doors were open, morning sunlight streaming in. James was already at work, his injured arm moving carefully as he leaned over an engine. He wore fresh coveralls, but Catherine could see the bandages peeking out at his wrist. She watched him for a moment, unobserved. There was something almost artistic in his movements, a practiced grace that spoke of decades mastering his craft. He treated each component with respect, each tool with care, completely absorbed in his work. "Good morning," she said softly. James straightened, turning toward her voice. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by genuine concern. "Are you all right? No delayed injuries?" The question was so perfectly him, immediate concern for others, no thought of himself, that Catherine felt her carefully prepared speech vanish. Instead, she found herself saying, "You never asked my name." He wiped his hands on a shop rag, giving her his full attention. "Didn't seem important at the time. Though I saw the news last night, Miss Wells." "Catherine," she corrected. "Please." James nodded, but she could see him struggling to reconcile her presence in his workspace. She didn't fit here, in her tailored pantsuit and Italian leather shoes, yet somehow she felt more real standing on this oil-stained concrete than she ever had in her corporate boardroom. "Your arm," she gestured to his bandages. "You should have let the paramedics treat you yesterday. It's nothing serious." He shrugged, then winced slightly at the movement. "Can I help you with something? If you're worried about damage to your clothing from yesterday, I'll certainly pay for marry me." The words hung in the air between them. James stared at her, shop rag frozen in his hands. In the background, a radio played soft country music. The fan belt of an old Chevy ticked as it cooled, and somewhere a phone was ringing unanswered. What?" Catherine pulled out the velvet box, opening it to reveal the simple gold band inside. "This was my grandmother's ring. She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for the moment I found something real." She took a deep breath. "Yesterday, you saved my life without knowing or caring who I was. You saw me, just me, when nobody has in longer than I can remember." James set down his rag with deliberate care. "Miss Wells." "Catherine, I think perhaps the shock of yesterday—" "I'm not in shock," she interrupted. "I'm more clear-headed than I've been in years. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my position, my family's influence. But you wanted nothing except to make sure I was safe. Then you went back to work, back to what matters to you." She stepped closer, holding out the ring. "I don't expect you to love me. I don't even expect you to like me. But I'm offering you a chance at something real, a partnership. Your garage needs modernization, needs capital to compete in today's market. I need someone who sees me as a person, not a prize. We could help each other." James looked at the ring, then at her face. His expression was unreadable. "That's not how marriage is supposed to work." "No," Catherine agreed softly, "but it's honest, more honest than most marriages I've seen." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I know more about cars than you might think, and I make excellent coffee." A ghost of a smile touched his lips despite himself. "This is crazy." "Probably," she admitted. "But sometimes crazy is better than sensible. Sometimes crazy is real." The morning sun caught the ring's simple band, making it glow like a promise. Around them, the garage waited, tools on the wall, cars in various states of repair. The honest smell of oil and metal and work, two worlds meeting in an impossible moment. "You don't even know me," James said finally. Catherine held his gaze. "I know enough. I know what matters." The tabloid's headline screamed across the front page, "Wells heiress to wed mechanic hero." Below it, a grainy photo showed Catherine leaving Miller's auto repair, James standing in the doorway behind her. The photographer had caught an unguarded moment, Catherine looking back over her shoulder, a soft smile playing at her lips, James watching her with a mix of bewilderment and something deeper, more contemplative. "They're calling it a real-life fairy tale," Richard Morton said, tossing the newspaper onto Catherine's desk. "The board is in an uproar. Charles Princeton is threatening to pull out of the merger. And your father—" "How is he?" Catherine interrupted, her voice softening. "Surprisingly calm, actually. Said something about you finally showing some Wells backbone." Richard sank into a chair. "Catherine, are you sure about this? The man's a complete unknown. No connections, no influence, nothing but a failing garage and the purest heart I've ever known," she finished. "That's worth more than all Princeton Global's assets combined." In the garage, James faced his own interrogation. Mrs. Thompson had appointed herself his unofficial mother, bringing him homemade soup and unwanted advice in equal measure. "It's not that we're not happy for you, dear," she said, watching him work on her Volvo. "But an heiress, that's a different world entirely, and so sudden." James tightened a bolt with perhaps more force than necessary. "I haven't said yes yet, but you will." It wasn't a question. Mrs. Thompson had known him since he was a boy. Because underneath all that practical thinking, you see something. In her. Something real. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Regular customers lingered longer than usual, their curiosity poorly disguised behind casual questions. Marco brought extra tamales for your girlfriend, with a knowing wink that made James flush. His father's reaction had been the hardest to face. Sitting beside the hospital bed, James had stumbled through an explanation, expecting disappointment or concern. Instead, Robert Miller had laughed, a real laugh, the first since his diagnosis. "Son," he'd said, "sometimes life hands you a miracle. Only a fool would question why." The media circus grew with each passing hour. Reporters camped outside the garage, forcing James to close the bay doors for the first time in 20 years. His phone rang constantly with interview requests and offers from morning shows. Catherine handled it with practiced grace, her PR team working overtime to control the narrative. But in private moments, like now, sitting in James's small office, after hours, she showed a different side. "I'm sorry about all this," she said, perched on his desk, watching him sort through the day's invoices. She'd changed into jeans and a simple blouse, looking more comfortable than she ever did in designer suits. "Not your fault," James replied, though they both knew it was. It'll die down eventually. You still haven't given me an answer." He set down his paperwork, meeting her eyes. "Because you haven't told me the real reason." Catherine stilled. "What do you mean? The garage, the partnership, the practical arrangements, that's all surface. There's something else, something you're not saying." The evening light filtered through the dusty window, casting long shadows across the office. In the distance, they could hear the persistent clicks of photographers' cameras. "All my life," Catherine said finally, "I've been surrounded by people who knew exactly what to say, exactly how to act. Every smile calculated, every gesture measured. But you—" She touched the grease stain on her jeans, a smile playing at her lips. "You're the first real thing I've found in years." James stood, moving to lean against the desk beside her. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Catherine felt that same flutter in her chest she'd experienced yesterday on the crosswalk. "My father always said a mechanic doesn't just fix cars," he said quietly. "He fixes trust. But trust needs time to build." "Then let's take time," Catherine replied. "Get to know each other, see if this crazy idea might actually work." She turned to face him. "Just don't say no." "Not yet." James looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the wealth and the headlines to the woman who'd walked into his garage with an impossible proposal and hope in her eyes. "Okay," he said simply. Outside, the media frenzy continued. Headlines were being written, stories spun, speculation running wild. But in the quiet of the office, surrounded by invoices and tool catalogues and the lingering smell of motor oil, two people from different worlds began the delicate work of building something real. The anonymous letter arrived on expensive paper, delivered to Miller's Auto Repair by courier. James found it when he opened the garage, the cream-colored envelope stark against the morning's bills and advertisements. Inside, the message was, brief but clear: "Consider carefully what you're risking. Not all accidents are accidental. Walk away now." He was still staring at it when Catherine arrived, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the local diner. She'd taken to stopping by in the mornings, learning the rhythm of his world. Today, she wore slacks and a simple blouse, her corporate armor set aside. "What's wrong?" she asked, seeing his expression. James handed her the letter wordlessly. She read it, her face hardening into the mask he was learning to recognize. Catherine Wells, corporate warrior, emerging from behind Catherine, the woman who liked to watch him work on engines. "Princeton," she said flatly. "This has his fingerprints all over it." "You seem unsurprised." "Disappointed, not surprised." She set down the coffee cups with careful precision. "The merger with Princeton Global would have been worth billions. Charles isn't used to losing, especially not to a—" She caught herself. "A mechanic?" James finished, his voice quiet. "That's not what it's what everyone else is thinking." He picked up a wrench, testing its weight in his hand. "Maybe they're right. Maybe this is too much of a gap to bridge." Catherine moved closer, taking the wrench from him and setting it down. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, James Miller? I see a man who built his life on honesty and hard work, who carries his father's legacy with pride, who saves lives without thinking twice." She touched his cheek, turning his face to hers. "The gap isn't between us. It's between what's real and what's pretend. And I'm tired of pretending." A throat cleared from the doorway. They turned to find Richard Morton standing there, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Catherine, the board has called an emergency meeting. They're voting on a motion to remove you from your position, citing erratic behavior and questionable judgment." Catherine's hand dropped from James's face, but she stood her ground. "On what grounds?" "You know on what grounds." Richard glanced at James. No offense intended, but surely you both see how this looks. The timing, right before the Princeton merger, the publicity, the unconventional nature of the relationship. You mean because I'm poor? James said bluntly. Richard had the grace to look embarrassed. The board has concerns about motivation and influence. There are suggestions that perhaps this whole incident was orchestrated. Orchestrated. Catherine's voice could have frozen hell. You think James deliberately caused a car accident, risked his life, just to what? Get close to me? To Wells Industries? These aren't my concerns, Richard protested, but the board can go to hell. Catherine's tone was pure steel. I own 30% of Wells Industries outright, another 15% through my trust. They can't remove me without a supermajority, which they won't get, not while my father's alive. Your father's health is precisely why they're moving now, Richard said quietly. They think you're vulnerable, emotionally compromised. James watched the exchange silently, seeing the weight settle on Catherine's shoulders. This was his fault. His presence in her life causing these complications, these threats. I should step back, he said finally. Give you space to handle this without... Don't you dare! Catherine's voice cracked like a whip. That's exactly what they want. To isolate me, control me, push me back into their neat little box. She turned to Richard. Schedule the board meeting. I'll be there. And Richard, tell Charles Princeton that if he wants a war, he's got one. After Richard left, silence filled the garage. Catherine stood rigid, hands clenched at her sides. James could almost see her building walls around herself, preparing for battle. Hey, he said softly, reaching for her hand. Come here. He led her to the Chevy he'd been working on, opened the hood. See this engine? It's a small block V8, probably older than both of us. But it works because every part knows its purpose, works in harmony. When something's not right, you don't just give up. You diagnose, you repair, you make it stronger. Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something in her chest unlock. This was why she'd given him her grandmother's ring. Not for love, not yet, but for moments like this, when simple wisdom cut through corporate complications. They're going to fight dirty, she warned. James smiled slightly, reaching for a wrench. Good thing I know how to get my hands dirty. 2. The morning sun streamed through the garage windows, glinting off chrome and steel. Outside, their worlds were colliding. Threats were mounting, battles were brewing. But here, in this moment, they were just a mechanic and a woman, standing over an engine, building something real, one piece at a time. The annual Wells Foundation Charity Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Grand Hall into a glittering wonderland of crystal and champagne. James stood at the top of the marble staircase, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time. The tuxedo Catherine had ordered fit perfectly, but he felt like a child playing dress-up. "Stop fidgeting," Catherine whispered, her hand finding his arm. "You look handsome." She was radiant in midnight blue silk, her grandmother's ring the only jewelry she wore. James had noticed she'd been wearing fewer diamonds lately, choosing simpler pieces that wouldn't snag on engine parts during her increasingly frequent visits to the garage. "They're all staring," he murmured as they descended the stairs. "Let them." Her chin lifted slightly. "They've been staring at me my whole life. At least now they have a reason." The whispers followed them across the floor. James caught fragments. "Saved her life. Quite handsome for a mechanic. Surely some mistake." He kept his spine straight, remembering his father's words during their last hospital visit. "Stand tall, son. A working man's dignity is worth more than their gold." Richard Morton intercepted them before they reached their table. "Catherine, the board members are expecting you to make the rounds. Perhaps Mr. Miller would be more comfortable at the bar." "Mr. Miller," Catherine said coolly, "will be joining me. As my fiancé, he should meet everyone, don't you think?" The next hour was a blur of introductions. James shook hands with senators, CEOs, old money families whose names he'd only seen in newspapers. He answered their carefully probing questions with simple honesty, refusing to be baited into revealing either resentment or social climbing ambitions. "And what are your plans for the garage?" a board member's wife asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Surely you'll sell it now?" "No, ma'am," James replied. "It's not just a business, it's a responsibility to the community. My father taught me that." He saw Catherine hide a smile behind her champagne glass. She'd been watching him navigate these waters, ready to intervene, but letting him find his own way. It was one of the things he was growing to admire about her, the way she could be both protector and partner, knowing when to step in and when to step back. The evening's crisis arrived with Charles Princeton. He approached their table during dinner, considerably deeper into his drinks than proper society allowed. "Catherine," he said, barely acknowledging James, "you're making a terrible mistake. The board meeting tomorrow is none of your concern." Catherine cut him off. "Everything about Wells Industries is my concern. Or it would have been if you hadn't thrown away our future for some working-class hero fantasy." James started to rise, but Catherine's hand on his arm stopped him. "Charles," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to draw attention from nearby tables, "you're embarrassing yourself. More importantly, you're boring me. Please leave." Princeton's face darkened. "You think this grease monkey understands your world, can protect your interests? He probably can't even tell the difference between the salad fork and the fish fork, soup spoon or champagne flute." James interrupted mildly. "My mother was a waitress at the plaza for 20 years. Mr. Princeton, she made sure I knew which utensil went with which course. Just like my father made sure I knew the difference between genuine quality and gold-plated pretense." A ripple of surprised laughter ran through the nearby tables. Princeton stood speechless, his carefully cultivated superiority crumbling in. The face of James's calm dignity. "I believe the lady asked you to leave," James added, rising slowly to his full height. He didn't need to make it sound like a threat. His presence was enough. After Princeton stormed off, Catherine leaned close to James's ear. "That was perfectly handled. I had a good teacher," he smiled. "You've been handling people like him your whole life." "Speaking of handling things," she nodded toward the stage, where Richard was gesturing for her to join him. "Time for my speech." James watched as Catherine took the podium, commanding the room's attention with practiced ease. But tonight there was something different in her bearing, a genuine warmth replacing practiced charm, real passion behind her words about community and responsibility. The Wells Foundation was built on the belief that true worth lies not in what we possess, but in what we give back, she said, her eyes finding James in the crowd. "Sometimes it takes an unexpected moment, an unplanned encounter, to remind us of what really matters." Sitting alone at their table, James felt the weight of hundreds of calculating gazes, but for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He was exactly where he needed to be, supporting the woman who'd crashed into his life with an impossible proposal and somehow made it feel like the most natural thing in the world. Catherine stood in front of the garage's bathroom mirror, adjusting her new coveralls. The name patch read, cat, James's suggestion after she'd mentioned how tired she was of being Catherine all the time. The heavy cotton felt more comfortable than any designer suit she'd ever worn. "You sure about this?" James asked from the doorway. "Board meeting's in 2 hours." She pulled her hair back into a practical ponytail. "The board can wait. Mrs. Thompson's brake lines are more important." It had started gradually. Catherine spending more time at the garage, watching James work, asking questions about engines and repairs. At first, the regular customers had been wary, expecting some corporate takeover, but Catherine's genuine interest and willingness to learn had won them over. "Remember," James said, leading her to Mrs. Thompson's Volvo, "brake lines are like arteries," Catherine finished. "They need to be checked for wear, properly fitted, and bled to remove air bubbles." She grinned at his surprised look. "I do pay attention when you talk, you know." Working together, they fell into an easy rhythm. Catherine's hands were naturally skilled. Years of working on her secret Mustang had taught her more than she'd realized. James guided her through the more complex parts, his teaching style as patient as his repair work. "You've got motor oil on your cheek," he noted, reaching out to wipe it away. His hand lingered for a moment, and Catherine felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Good," she said softly. "It means I'm doing something real." The morning passed quickly. Regular customers drifted in and out, no longer batting an eye at the sight of a Wells heiress in coveralls working alongside James. Marco brought his usual tamales, insisting Catherine take extras. "Too skinny from all those fancy salads," he declared. During a quiet moment, Catherine found herself studying James as he worked on an engine diagnostic. There was something mesmerizing about his focus, the sure confidence of his movements. He treated every car, every customer, with the same respect, whether it was a rusty pickup or a luxury sedan. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "I was just thinking about the first day we met," she said. "How you saw me, really saw me, when I was just another pedestrian in your path." "You were never just anything," James replied, setting down his tools. "Even before I knew your name, there was something about you, a kind of sadness behind the perfect facade. Made me want to know the real story. And now that you know it," he turned to face her, his eyes serious. "Now I know there are two Catherines, the one they created and the one you really are. I'm pretty fond of the real one." Catherine's breath caught. They'd been dancing around this growing feeling between them, both afraid to push too fast, too soon. The engagement had started as a practical arrangement, but lately, the garage door rattled open and Richard Morton burst in, looking harried. "Catherine, where have you been? The board's been calling, Princeton's lawyers are circling, and you're here playing mechanic?" "Not playing," Catherine corrected, holding up her grease-stained hands. "Working, learning, living." "This isn't a game," Richard snapped. "Your father's asking for you. The doctors say—" Catherine stilled. James was at her side instantly, his hand finding hers. "Go," he said quietly. "Family comes first. We'll finish Mrs. Thompson's car later." She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Come with me? To the hospital?" James looked uncertain. "I'm not exactly—" "You're exactly who I need right now." Catherine met his eyes. "The real me needs the real you." Richard watched this exchange with a mixture of frustration and dawning understanding. The Catherine Wells he'd known all her life, controlled, strategic, always perfectly put together, had been replaced by someone more genuine, more human. And the catalyst for that change was this grease-stained mechanic who looked at her like She was more precious than any fortune. At least change clothes, Richard sighed, defeated. No, Catherine said firmly. My father knows who I am, who I'm becoming. She looked down at her coveralls, at the cat patch over her heart. This is me now. As they left the garage, Catherine caught her reflection in a car window. Oil smudge on her cheek, hair slightly messy, dressed in worker's clothes. She looked nothing like the corporate princess she'd been raised to be. Instead, she looked like someone real, someone whole. James helped her into his old pickup truck rather than her waiting town car. And Catherine felt the last pieces of her old life shifting, realigning into something new and unexpectedly beautiful. Something built on honest work, genuine feelings, and the kind of love that grew not from grand gestures or social expectations, but from quiet moments of truth shared between two people brave enough to be real. The hospital corridor seemed longer than usual as Catherine and James made their way to William Wells's private room. She still wore her coveralls, though she'd washed her hands. James walked beside her, his quiet strength a comfort she hadn't known she needed until now. The merger contract sat unopened in her briefcase. Princeton Global's final offer, delivered by courier an hour ago. Its weight felt like a judgment. William Wells lay propped up against white pillows, looking smaller than Catherine remembered. But his eyes were sharp as ever as they took in his daughter's appearance, then shifted to James. "So," he said, voice rough but amused, "this is the mechanic who's turned my corporate princess into a grease monkey." "Daddy," Catherine started, but William waved her off. "Come here, young man. Let me see you properly." James approached the bed, his natural dignity unchanged by the setting. He met William's evaluating gaze steadily, neither defensive nor intimidated. "Sir," he said simply, offering his hand. William's handshake was weak, but his grip lingered. "Tell me, Mr. Miller, what are your intentions toward my daughter? And don't give me the rehearsed answer. I've had enough of those to last a lifetime." James glanced at Catherine, then back to William. "Honestly, sir, I'm still trying to figure that out. This started as something practical, a partnership that made sense on paper. But your daughter—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's the most real person I've ever met. Once you get past all the walls this world built around her, my intention is to help her stay that way, whatever it costs." William's eyes narrowed. "Even if it costs you your garage? Princeton's lawyers are circling like vultures. One word from me, and the merger goes through. Wells Industries absorbs Princeton Global. Catherine takes her place as joint CEO, and everybody gets what they wanted originally." He coughed, reaching for water. Catherine moved to help, but he waved her back. "Or everybody except you, Mr. Miller. You'd lose it all." "Not all," James said quietly. "I'd still have my father's respect, my community's trust, the knowledge that I did what was right, not what was easy." A monitor beeped steadily in the silence that followed. Outside, the window, the city stretched endlessly, buildings reaching toward a grey sky that promised rain. "Catherine," William said finally, "open that contract you're carrying." She hesitated, then pulled out the merger document. William gestured for her to read it aloud. "In consideration of the mutual benefits, Princeton Global agrees to acquire, subject to the following conditions." She stopped, color draining from her face. "This isn't just a merger contract. They've added a clause about my personal life. If I don't end my relationship with James, they'll what?" James asked gently. "They'll call in the loans on your garage, all of them, immediately." Catherine's hands shook. "They've bought up all your debt. They'll force you into—" Bankruptcy unless I agree to marry Charles Princeton instead. William watched them both carefully. Corporate warfare isn't pretty, is it? This is the world you're choosing to enter, Mr. Miller. Last chance to walk away clean. James stepped closer to Catherine, his hand finding hers. With all due respect, sir, there's nothing clean about abandoning someone you... He stopped, suddenly aware of what he'd been about to say. Someone you what? William pressed. Someone you love, James finished quietly, eyes on Catherine. And yes, I know how that sounds. Too fast, too sudden, too much like a fairy tale. But sometimes the most improbable things are the most real. Catherine's grip on his hand tightened, her eyes bright with unshed tears. William Wells struggled to sit up straighter. Do you know why I built Wells Industries, Catherine? Not for the money, not for the power. I built it because I loved your mother, and I wanted to give her the world. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that the world isn't made of stock options and merger contracts. It's made of moments like this, when someone looks at you and sees past everything you own to who you really are. He reached for the merger contract, his movements deliberate despite their weakness. With careful precision, he tore it in half. Daddy, the company will survive, William interrupted. We still own controlling interest. Princeton can't touch us without this merger. He smiled slightly. Besides, I've always hated Charles Princeton. Man can't tell a carburetor from a catalytic converter. The tension broke. Catherine laughed through her tears, and even James cracked a smile. Mr. Miller, William said, suddenly serious again, take care of my daughter, not her fortune, not her position, just her. Yes, sir, James replied. That's one promise. I know I can keep. Thunder rumbled outside, the promised rain finally beginning to fall. But in that hospital room, something bright and genuine was blooming, something that no corporate contract could capture or contain. The crisis wasn't over. There would be consequences, battles still to fight. But for now, 3 people from very different worlds had found common ground in the simple truth that love, real love, was worth more than all the mergers in the world. James stared at his resignation letter, the words blurring before his eyes. Outside the garage, rain fell steadily, matching his mood. The past week had been a storm of its own. Princeton's lawyers making good on their threats, loan officers calling, suppliers suddenly cancelling long-standing credit arrangements. He'd tried to shield Catherine from it, but she was too smart for that. She'd offered to pay off his loans, save the garage with a fraction of her fortune. The argument that followed was their first real fight. It's just money, she'd insisted, pacing his small office. Money I have more than enough of. It's not about the money, he'd replied, his voice tight with frustration. It's about everything your world thinks about mine. That we can be bought, that we have a price. That's not what I know that's not what you meant, but it's what they'll say, that I used you, manipulated you, played the hero to get my hands on Wells' money. Now, a week later, the letter sat heavy in his hands. Maybe it would be better this way, stepping back, giving her space to navigate her world without him complicating everything. The door chimed, and he looked up to see Mrs. Thompson entering, shaking rain from her umbrella. "Don't you dare," she said, seeing the letter. "Mrs. Thompson, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, James Miller. I know that look. That's your father's noble sacrifice look, and it's just as foolish on you as it was on him." She settled into the chair across from his desk, arranging her rain-spotted skirt. "Did I ever tell you about the time your father tried to sell the garage? It was after your mother died. He thought he couldn't be both father and businessman, that he had to choose. Know what changed his mind? James shook his head. You did. He found you asleep under old Mr. Peterson's Buick, wrench in your hand, oil on your cheeks. Said he realized then that some things aren't meant to be given up, no matter how hard they get. The bell chimed again. This time it was Marco, then Sandy from the diner, then old Mr. Chen from the electronics store. One by one, the neighborhood gathered in his garage, sheltering from the rain and bringing with them a lifetime of shared history. We heard about the loans, Marco said simply. We can't match Princeton's money, but we have some savings. Between us all, James's throat tightened. I can't accept. You can, and you will, Mrs. Thompson interrupted, because it's not charity, it's community. The same community you and your father have been holding together for decades. His phone buzzed. Catherine. He let it go to voicemail. Not ready to face her yet. Not ready to admit that his pride might be costing them both something precious. Sandy spoke up from near the coffee maker. You know what I think? I think you're not really worried about the money or the garage. I think you're scared because that girl loves you for exactly who you are, and you're not sure you deserve it. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. The resignation letter crumpled in his fist. She wore coveralls, Mr. Chen added thoughtfully. Real ones, not for show. Learned to change oil, fix brakes. Rich girl like that could have. Bought 10 garages. Instead, she wanted to learn the work. That's not about money. The rain drummed on the roof, a steady rhythm like his father's old timing belt tester. Through the window, he could see Catherine's town car pulling up, her figure emerging with an umbrella. She's here, Mrs. Thompson announced unnecessarily. Question is, are you going to let your pride tear apart something real, or are you going to remember what your father taught you about the things worth keeping? Catherine entered, looking tired but determined. She took in the gathered crowd, understanding dawning in her eyes. I got your voicemail, she said to Mrs. Thompson. Thank you for calling me. Well, somebody had to knock some sense into this boy's head. He's as stubborn as his father. The community began to filter out, each person touching James's shoulder or squeezing his arm as they passed. They nodded to Catherine with genuine warmth. She wasn't just the Wells heiress to them anymore. She was James's girl, the one who learned their names and fixed their cars. When they were alone, Catherine spoke first. I'm sorry about offering the money. I should have understood. No, James interrupted. I'm the one who should be sorry. I was so focused on proving I couldn't be bought that I forgot something important. What's that? He stood, crossing to where she waited. That sometimes accepting help isn't about price tags. It's about trusting someone enough to let them love you, pride and all. The rain fell softer now, more gentle. In its rhythm, they could both hear the sound of walls coming down, of bridges being rebuilt, of something real surviving its first real storm. The old mechanical pocket watch felt heavy in Catherine's hands. She sat cross-legged on the floor of James's apartment, surrounded by boxes of his father's things. Robert Miller had passed peacefully in his sleep the night before, and they'd spent the morning bringing home the pieces of his life from the hospital. Dad gave me that watch when I turned 18, James said, settling beside her. It was his father's before him. Never kept perfect time, but he said that was the point. Some things aren't meant to be perfect, just genuine. Catherine ran her thumb over the worn face, seeing the years of history etched into every scratch and dent. Tell me about him. Not just as your father, but as the man he was. James was quiet for a moment, sorting through memories. He believed in doing things right, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. Never turned away a customer who was. Short on cash, never cut corners even when it would have been easier. He smiled slightly. Had terrible taste in music, though. Used to blast Johnny Cash so loud the whole block could hear it. Is that why you still play country music in the garage? Yeah. Doesn't feel right without it. Catherine leaned against him, still holding the watch. In the week since their near breakup, something had shifted between them. The practical arrangement had evolved into something deeper, more real. She'd spent every evening here learning James's world through his father's stories, understanding the legacy that meant more than any fortune. You know what he said to me? That last day in the hospital? James's voice was soft. He said, "Son, I worried I didn't leave you enough. No big inheritance, no trust fund. But then I saw how you look at her and how she looks at you, and I realized I left you the most important thing. I taught you how to recognize what's real." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. He was wrong about one thing, though. He left you a huge inheritance. Every person who comes to the garage with a story about how he helped them, every lesson about doing things right, every principle he lived by, that's worth more than any trust fund. James took the watch from her hands, its gentle ticking a counterpoint to the city sounds outside. I've been thinking about what he'd want. Not just for the garage, but for us. What do you mean? He never cared about being rich or powerful. He cared about being useful, about making a difference in people's lives. James turned to face her. What if we could do both? Combine your world and mine in a way that matters. Catherine sat up straighter, recognizing the tone he used when solving a particularly complex mechanical problem. I'm listening. Wells Industries has resources, connections. The garage has community trust, practical knowledge. What if instead of just fixing cars, we fixed the system? Training programs for at-risk youth, apprenticeships, fair loans for small businesses, a foundation, Catherine breathed. Not just charity, but real change. Teaching people to fish, as they say. Dad always said a mechanic doesn't just fix cars. He fixes trust. They finished together. The morning light filtered through James's modest windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried, a dog barked, life went on. But in that small apartment, surrounded by the pieces of a humble but noble life, two people from different worlds were finding common ground in the most unexpected place. The space between what they'd been given and what they could give back. Your board won't like it, James said finally. Using Wells' money to help small businesses compete. The board doesn't have to like it. Daddy left me controlling interest for a reason. Catherine picked up an old photo of Robert Miller teaching a young James how to use a wrench. He knew someday I'd need the power to do what's right, not just what's profitable. James watched her studying the photo, seeing not the corporate princess the world knew, but the woman who'd learned to change oil, who knew his customers' names, who understood that real value couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. I love you, he said simply. Not because of any of this, but because you see what Dad saw. That life isn't about what you have, it's about what you do with it. Catherine set down the photo and took his hand, their fingers intertwining like the two worlds they were slowly learning to bridge. I love you too, not despite our differences, but because of them. Because you taught me that real doesn't mean perfect, it just means true. The old pocket watch ticked steadily beside them, marking time not in perfect precision, but in honest moments. Like them, it didn't need to be flawless to be valuable. It just needed to keep going, one genuine beat at a time. The combined business plan sat between them on James's workbench, its fresh pages contrasting with the well-worn tools surrounding it. Catherine had spent weeks working on it, combining Wells Industries' corporate expertise with the practical wisdom she'd learned in the garage. The Miller-Wells Foundation for Automotive Education and Community Development, James read aloud, testing the weight of the words. That's quite a mouthful. We could call it the Mechanics Trust for short, Catherine suggested, watching. His reaction. Your father would have liked that. The plan was ambitious, but grounded in reality. The foundation would start with Miller's Auto Repair as its flagship location, expanding to create a network of community-based training centers. Each would combine practical education with small business support, giving people not just skills, but the tools to build their own futures. Look at these numbers, James said, flipping through the projections. Training 20 students per center, multiplied by 10 centers in the first year, that's a lot of lives changed. Catherine pointed to another section. And here's where it becomes self-sustaining. The graduates who start their own shops can become mentors themselves, creating a ripple effect. It's not charity, it's investment in human potential. They'd already tested the concept in a small way. Tommy, the teenager who'd been hanging around the garage, had become their unofficial pilot program. Under James's guidance, he'd gone from washing cars to doing basic repairs. Now he was talking about technical college, the board meetings. Tomorrow, Catherine said quietly. They'll fight it, you know. They'll say it's too risky, too unconventional. Since when has that stopped you? James smiled, reaching for her hand. Besides, we have something they don't. What's that? Reality. They live in spreadsheets and profit margins. We live in the real world where people need second chances and honest work. The bell chimed as Mrs. Thompson entered, right on schedule for her car's monthly checkup. She took in the scene, the business plan, their joined hands, the hope in their eyes, and smiled knowingly. Planning something big, are we? Catherine straightened. Actually, Mrs. Thompson, we could use your help. How would you feel about being on our community advisory board? The next hour was spent explaining the foundation's concept to Mrs. Thompson, whose practical suggestions helped refine their vision. By the time she left, they had their first board member and a list of potential community representatives. See, Catherine said, adding notes to their plan. This is how we bridge the gap, not by imposing corporate solutions, but by listening to the people who live here. James watched her work, marveling at how naturally she moved between worlds now. The Catherine who commanded boardrooms and the Cat who changed oil were no longer separate personas. They'd merged into someone stronger, more complete. We should include a scholarship, he said suddenly, in Dad's name, for students who show the same kind of, what did you call it in the proposal? Technical intuition and community commitment. The Robert Miller Memorial Scholarship. Catherine wrote it in. Perfect. The afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows, painting everything in warm light. Outside, the neighborhood went about its business. Marco's food truck serving lunch crowds, Mr. Chen fixing computers, Sandy waiting tables at the diner, each one a small business owner, each one a potential mentor in their program. You know what this means? James said, studying the plan. If it works, it changes everything, not just here, but everywhere we open a center. When it works, Catherine corrected. And yes, that's the point. Real change. One person at a time. She smiled. Just like a certain mechanic changed me, one day at a time. They were interrupted by a group of suits entering the garage, Catherine's legal team right on schedule. The lawyers looked comically out of place among the tools and engine parts, but Catherine had insisted on holding the meeting here. This is where it starts, she'd said. They need to understand that. As Catherine walked them through the proposal, James watched with pride. She handled their questions with the same confidence she showed, explaining engine repairs, translating between corporate speak and practical reality with practiced ease. The Wells Industries Board of Directors has a fiduciary responsibility, one lawyer began, to ensure the company's long-term success, Catherine finished. And what could be more successful than creating a sustainable model for community development while building brand loyalty and skilled workforce pipelines? James hid a smile. She'd learned to speak both languages fluently, the formal corporate discourse and the straightforward talk of the garage. In doing so, she'd become a bridge herself, connecting two worlds that had always existed in parallel, but never truly met. The future they were building wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt. But looking at Catherine, in her element, defending their vision with passion and precision, James knew they'd succeed. Because unlike the corporate mergers and acquisitions that filled the business pages, this wasn't about money or power. This was about something real. The wedding invitation lay on James's workbench, its elegant simplicity capturing the essence of their journey. The cream-colored paper featured two intertwined wrenches forming a heart, with text that read, "Two worlds, one love, Catherine Wells, and James Miller requests the honor of your presence." "It's perfect," Mrs. Thompson declared, examining the invitation. "Just like both of you, elegant but practical." The garage had become wedding planning central, much to the amusement of their regular customers. Catherine's high-end wedding planner worked alongside Marco's wife, who was handling the authentic Mexican catering. Designer flower arrangements would share space with potted plants from Mr. Chen's garden. "The society papers are calling it the wedding of the year," Catherine said, sliding under a car to check its transmission. Her designer wedding planner had nearly fainted when she announced she was continuing to work at the garage right up until the ceremony, though probably not for the reasons they expect. James watched her work with pride. Her diagnosis of engine problems had become as accurate as his own, her hands as sure with a wrench as they were with a fountain pen, signing corporate contracts. "Did you tell them about the venue yet?" he asked. Catherine emerged from under the car, a smudge of oil on her cheek. "Not yet. I'm saving that surprise for the formal announcement." They had decided to hold the ceremony in the garage, not Wells Industries corporate headquarters, not the country club, not any of the prestigious venues that had practically begged to host them. The garage would be transformed but not disguised, its honest functionality celebrated rather than hidden. "Your mother would have loved this," Sandy said, bringing coffee from the diner. Both of them would have. It was true. Elizabeth Wells and Marie Miller had never met, but they would have recognized in each other the same fierce dedication to their children's happiness. Catherine touched the simple pearl necklace that had been her mother's, while James adjusted the old work apron hanging on the wall, his mother's constant companion during her waitressing years. The bell chimed as Richard Morton entered, looking more relaxed than they'd ever seen him. The success of the Miller Wells Foundation's first training center had turned him from skeptic to supporter. The board's final wedding gift decision came through, he announced. They've agreed to fund 10 more training centers, one in each major city where Wells Industries has operations. Catherine hugged him impulsively, leaving an oil stain on his suit that he didn't seem to mind. The corporate world was slowly learning what the neighborhood had always known, that real value wasn't always measured in profit margins. "Did you see the RSVPs?" James asked later, as they closed up for the day. Marco's whole extended family, Mrs. Thompson's bridge club, every small business owner in the neighborhood, mixed in with corporate CEOs and society figures. Just like us, Catherine smiled. A perfect blend of both worlds. The evening light filtered through the garage, windows casting long shadows. Tomorrow would bring more wedding preparations, more merging of their different worlds. But tonight was for them, for the quiet moments that had built their love one day at a time. "Dance with me," Catherine said suddenly. "Here? Now?" She reached over and turned on the radio. Johnny Cash's deep voice filled the garage. James's, father's favorite, now their song too. "Here and now," she confirmed. "In our work clothes, in our place, just us being real." James took her in his arms, their feet moving naturally between toolboxes and car parts. Catherine's head rested on his shoulder, and he could smell the mixture of designer perfume and motor oil that had become uniquely her. 2 weeks, he murmured. Having any second thoughts about marrying a mechanic? Only about waiting this long to do it. She lifted her head to meet his eyes. "You know what my father said when I told him about the garage ceremony? He said, 'Finally, a Wells wedding that's about love instead of mergers and acquisitions.'" They swayed to the music, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the echoes of their shared journey. On Catherine's finger, her grandmother's ring caught the light, no longer a symbol of an arranged partnership, but a testament to something real and earned. "I love you," James said, the words as natural as breathing. "Not the corporate princess or the grease monkey, but all of you. Every real, complicated, amazing part." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "The man who saved my life twice, once from a speeding car and once from a life of pretending to be someone I'm not." Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening. Marco's truck headed home. Sandy changed shifts at the diner. Mr. Chen locked up his shop. Their community, the one that had watched their love story unfold, that had supported them, believed in them, helped them bridge their 2 worlds. Tomorrow they would return to wedding preparations, to foundation work, to building their shared future. But tonight was for this dance, this moment, this simple truth that love, real love, doesn't bridge worlds or break barriers. It creates something entirely new, something perfectly imperfect, something absolutely real. The morning sun streamed through Miller's Auto Repair's freshly cleaned windows, catching the thousands of tiny lights strung across the ceiling. Tool chests had been transformed into elegant buffet stations, workbenches into cocktail tables, each one topped with centerpieces combining white roses and perfectly polished spark plugs. James stood in his father's old office, now his, adjusting his bow tie. He'd insisted on getting ready here rather than in some luxury hotel suite. This was where he'd first seen Catherine, where their story had begun. His new tuxedo hung perfectly, but his hands still bore the honest calluses of his trade, exactly as Catherine had insisted they should. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Thompson, dabbing at her eyes already. "Your father would be so proud," she said, straightening his lapel. "And wait until you see her." The garage had been transformed but not disguised. Vintage cars lined the walls, their chrome gleaming, each one telling part of their story. Catherine's restored Mustang held the place of honor, the secret project that had first taught her the joy of working with her hands. The guests were a sight to behold. Corporate executives in designer suits mingled with mechanics in their Sunday best. Marco's entire family had turned out, his food truck parked outside, serving as an auxiliary kitchen. Mr. Chen had closed his shop for the day, his traditional Chinese formal wear drawing admiring looks from society ladies. William Wells sat in, The front row, looking frail but determined. His doctors had advised against attending, but he'd refused to miss this. "My daughter's marrying a man who sees her real worth," he'd declared. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The music changed. Not the traditional wedding march, but a gentle acoustic version of the Johnny Cash song they danced to that evening in the garage. The guests turned, and James felt his breath catch. Catherine appeared in the garage's main doorway, sunlight haloing her figure. Her dress was elegantly simple, its white silk complemented by a tool belt fashioned of silver and pearls, a wedding gift from the neighborhood craftsman. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of white roses, wrapped with her father's golden business card and James's mother's old waitress apron. As she walked down the aisle, a path lined with perfectly arranged wreaths and flowers, James saw their whole journey in her radiant face. The corporate princess who'd become a grease monkey, the stranger he'd saved, who'd ended up saving him right back, the woman who'd taught him that love wasn't about bridging two worlds, but creating a new one. "Nice coveralls," she whispered as she reached him, nodding at the formal black and white design subtly worked into his tuxedo fabric. "Nice tool belt," he whispered back, his voice rough with emotion. The ceremony itself was a perfect blend of traditional and unique. They exchanged conventional vows, then added their own, written on the back of an old repair invoice. "I promise to always see the real you," James said, "to value honesty over perfection, and to love you in coveralls or evening gowns." "I promise to keep my hands dirty and my heart true," Catherine replied, "to remember that love, like engines, needs both maintenance and faith, and to always choose what's real over what's expected." The rings they exchanged told their own story. Catherine's grandmother's ring, now paired with a band James had crafted himself in the garage, using metal from his father's old tools. His ring was simple steel, engraved inside with a timing chain. Pattern, a reminder that love, like engines, worked best when everything was in perfect sync. "By the power vested in me," the officiant said, "and with the blessing of two families, two communities, and two worlds made one, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was met with cheers, applause, and the sound of Marco's food truck horn honking in celebration. As they turned to face their guests, James caught sight of their reflection in a nearby car's polished surface. The mechanic and the heiress, the practical and the privileged, two people who had found something real in a world of surfaces and shows. The reception that followed was as unique as their journey. Champagne was served in mason jars. Caviar shared table space with Marco's tamales, and the dance floor, cleared in the center of the garage, saw society waltzes mixing with neighborhood line dances. Late in the evening, as the celebration continued around them, James and Catherine slipped away to the quiet of his office. The old pocket watch sat on his desk, still keeping its imperfect time, still marking the honest moments of their life together. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close. Catherine touched the silver tool belt, ran her fingers over her grandmother's ring, and smiled at their reflection in the window. Two people who had found their truth in the most unexpected place. "Real," she corrected, "which is better than happy. Real is forever." Outside, their two worlds celebrated together, barriers broken, differences forgotten, united in celebrating something authentic and true. But in that quiet office, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the echoes of their journey, James and Catherine simply held each other, knowing that they had found something most people only dreamed of, a love as solid as steel, as precious as diamonds and as real as the oil-stained concrete beneath their feet. 1 year later, the sign above Miller's Auto Repair had a new addition: Miller and Wells Auto Empire, home of the Mechanics Trust. The original lettering remained unchanged, but beneath it gleamed a modern logo combining a wrench and the Wells Industries corporate symbol. Catherine stood in the doorway of what had once been just a neighborhood garage, watching the morning unfold. In the main bay, James was teaching a class of 20 students, the Foundation's latest training group. They came from all walks of life: former office workers seeking new careers, young people from struggling neighborhoods, veterans looking for civilian skills. "Remember," James was saying, his father's patient teaching style evident in every word, "an engine tells you its story if you know how to listen." Same with people. Sometimes the real problem isn't what they first tell you. The students nodded, taking notes. Among them was Tommy, now a teaching assistant himself, helping guide the newer students. He'd graduated from technical college last month, his tuition covered by the Robert Miller Memorial Scholarship. Mrs. Wells Miller, Claire, Catherine's assistant, appeared with a tablet. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Thank you, Claire, and please, in the garage it's just Kat." Catherine had kept her office at Wells Industries, but she spent most mornings here working alongside James. Her corporate suits now shared closet space with well-worn coveralls, each outfit appropriate for the different parts of her life that had somehow become one harmonious whole. The Foundation had exceeded even their optimistic projections. 10 training centers had become 20, each one partnering with local businesses and community leaders. The model worked because it was real, built on honest work, practical skills, and genuine community involvement. "How's the new transmission curriculum coming along?" she asked James as he finished his lesson. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, grinning. "Better than expected. Your idea about incorporating computer diagnostics alongside traditional mechanical training was brilliant. Students get the best of both worlds." Just like us, Catherine thought, watching him. James had adapted to their expanded role without losing his essential nature. He still worked on cars himself, still knew every customer by name, still believed in doing things right. But now he also sat on the Foundation's board, helping shape policies that would affect thousands of lives. The garage's bell chimed as William Wells entered, walking with a cane, but looking stronger than he had in months. The experimental treatment Catherine had found was working, giving them precious extra time. He came to the garage almost daily now, sitting in a comfortable chair in the corner, watching the legacy they were building. "Papa Wells!" several students called out. They'd adopted him as a grandfather figure, eager for his stories about building something from nothing. "How are my future entrepreneurs today?" he asked, settling into his chair. "Learning to fix more than just engines, I hope?" "Yes, sir," Tommy replied. "James was just teaching us about diagnostic listening." "Good, good," William nodded approvingly. "You know, I built Wells Industries on the principle that every problem has a solution if you're willing to look deep enough. But I think you're learning an even more important lesson here, that every person has potential if you're willing to invest in them." Catherine checked her watch. Time for her board meeting. But before she left, she took a moment to absorb the scene. Students gathered around engines, learning not just repairs, but life skills. James, in his element, teaching with the same passion his father had shown. Her own father, finding new purpose in mentoring the next generation. The corporate world had been skeptical of their marriage, their foundation, their whole approach, but the results spoke for themselves. The training centers were producing skilled workers and small business owners who understood both technical expertise and community responsibility. Wells Industries' reputation had actually improved, showing that profit and purpose could coexist. "Ready for the board meeting?" James asked, coming to stand beside her. "Almost." She pulled him close for a quick kiss, not caring about the grease stains on his coveralls. "Just thinking about how far we've come." "Having any regrets about any of it?" Catherine looked around at their creation, the perfect blend of corporate resources and community heart, of practical skills and progressive vision, of two worlds that had become something entirely new. "Only that we didn't start sooner," she said. "But then again, maybe everything happened exactly when it needed to, when we were ready to see what was real." James touched her grandmother's ring, still paired with the band he'd made. "Dad always said timing was everything, in engines and in life." "Speaking of timing," she smiled mysteriously, "we should talk later. I have some news that might require adjusting our timetable a bit." James's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "You mean, let's just say our little empire might need a nursery soon." The morning sun streamed through the garage windows, catching the sign outside. Miller and Wells Auto Empire, home of the Mechanics Trust, a name that represented not just their business or their foundation, but their life together, built on trust, strengthened by love, and absolutely perfectly real. They say life's greatest moments often come disguised as ordinary days. For James and Catherine Miller Wells, it began with a split-second decision at a crosswalk, a mechanic's instinct to save a stranger's life. Neither could have known that moment would transform not just their lives, but countless others through their foundation. Today, the Miller and Wells Auto Empire stands as testament to what happens when two worlds collide and create something real. In the garage where their story began, future mechanics learn alongside future business leaders, each understanding that true value isn't measured in dollars or status, but in lives changed and trust earned. And if you look closely, you might see them still, the mechanic and the heiress, hand in hand, building something authentic in a world of pretense, proving that love's greatest power lies not in changing who we are, but in finally becoming who we were meant to be.